What if I told you that while the West is busy arguing about whether space solar power is even possible, China has already built the test facilities, assembled the research teams, and set a concrete timeline to deploy what could be the most revolutionary energy technology in human history? This is not science fiction anymore, folks. This is actually happening right now, as we speak. And if you think this is just another one of those ambitious announcements that will never materialize, I need you to stick around, because what I am about to reveal will fundamentally change how you see the global energy race, and quite possibly the future of human civilization itself. But before we dive deep into this incredible story, do me a quick favor. If you find this content valuable, smash that like button, because it genuinely helps more people discover this channel. Subscribe if you have not already, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update on these world-changing developments. Also, if you know someone who needs to hear about this massive shift in global power dynamics, share this video with them right now. Trust me, they will thank you later. Now let us get into it. Picture this. Is 1978, and China is still recovering from the devastating Cultural Revolution. The country sends a high-powered delegation on a 36-day mission across Western Europe, visiting 25 cities in 5 countries. They toured factories, universities, research institutes, and what they saw shocked them to their core. Chinese officials came back with a sobering assessment that their nation was at least 20 years behind the West in science, technology, and industrial capability. That realization sparked what we now know as the Reform and Opening Up era, decades of relentless modernization that would transform China from a developing nation into the world's manufacturing powerhouse. Fast forward to today, and the tables have completely turned in ways that would have seemed absolutely impossible back then. China is no longer playing catch-up. In many critical technology sectors, China is setting the pace while Western nations scramble to keep up. And nowhere is this more evident than in the race for space-based solar power, a technology that could literally revolutionize how humanity generates and consumes energy for the next 5 billion years. Here is what makes this so extraordinary. Senior Chinese rocket scientist Long Lihao, a member of the prestigious Chinese Academy of Engineering, recently revealed details of China's ambitious plan to build what he calls another Three Gorges Dam project above the Earth. Now, think about that comparison for a moment. The Three Gorges Dam is the largest hydropower installation on the planet, generating 100 billion kilowatt-hours of electricity annually. And China is essentially planning to replicate that kind of energy output, but from space, where the sun shines 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. The project involves constructing a massive 1-kilometer-wide solar array in geostationary orbit, approximately 36,000 kilometers above Earth. At that altitude, the solar panels would receive constant, unfiltered sunlight without any interference from clouds, weather, or the day-night cycle that limits terrestrial solar installations. Chinese scientists estimate this space-based array will operate at more than 10 times the efficiency of photovoltaic panels on Earth. 10 times. Let that sink in for a moment. But here is where it gets even more impressive. This is not just talk. China has been investing in space-based solar power since the early 2000s, and they have already built ground infrastructure to prove they are serious about execution. The Beijing testing facility in Chongqing, backed by $15 million in funding from the local district government, is already fine-tuning the radio wave transmission technology needed to beam solar energy from orbit down to Earth. The facility occupies over 13 hectares and has conducted successful microwave transmission tests at altitudes of 300 meters using tethered balloons. Researchers from Chongqing University, the China Academy of Space Technology, and Xidian University are all collaborating on this project. Now let me break down China's roadmap for you because the timeline is remarkably concrete. Between 2025 and 2029, they plan to conduct stratospheric tests with small and medium-sized solar power stations. By 2028, they aim to launch a low Earth orbit test satellite generating 10 kilowatts of power to trial microwave transmission. By 2030, a 1-megawatt station is expected to be deployed in geostationary orbit at 36,000 kilometers, assembled in space, before beaming power back to Earth. By 2035, the system should scale up to 10 megawatts. And by 2050, the goal is a commercially operated solar power plant in space generating 2 gigawatts of electricity. 2 gigawatts, people. That is the equivalent of 2 large nuclear power plants running continuously without any fuel costs, without any carbon emissions, and without any of the safety concerns. Now here is the critical technology that makes all of this possible. The Long March 9 rocket, a super heavy lift launch vehicle currently under development, will be capable of carrying 150,000 kilograms to low Earth orbit and 54,000 kilograms to translunar injection. This rocket is being designed specifically to support major national projects like lunar research stations, space power stations, and manned landings on Mars. China also just set a new national record in 2025 with 93 space launches in a single year, demonstrating the rapid development of their launch capabilities. So, where does the West stand in all of this? Well, let me be blunt with you. The picture is not pretty. In the United States, NASA released a study in January 2024 that essentially poured cold water on the entire concept of space-based solar power. The study projected that 2 space solar design concepts would incur baseline life cycle costs of $610 and $1,590 per megawatt hour respectively, making them 12 to 80 times more expensive than terrestrial renewable alternatives. John Mankins, a former NASA scientist who led the landmark Fresh Look study on space solar power in the late 1990s, sharply criticized the report, arguing that NASA based its findings on conservative assumptions and simply does not want to invest in this technology because they would rather focus on going to Mars. Meanwhile, the European Space Agency launched its Solaris program in November 2022 with ambitious goals to prepare Europe for space-based solar power. The program commissioned studies from Arthur D. Little and Thales Alenia Space, Italy, to develop concept designs for commercial-scale plants. European leaders were supposed to make a decision by the end of 2025 on whether to proceed with a full development program. But here is what actually happened. According to reports, ESA decided that the technologies were still relatively immature and chose not to pursue Solaris in the way it had been originally imagined. The project essentially ended around August 2024. So while China is building test facilities and setting concrete deployment timelines, Europe is still debating whether the technology is even feasible. This pattern repeats itself across the entire technology landscape. A recent report from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute found that China is now dominating 90% of the most crucial technology fields that could define economic and military competition for decades. Let me repeat that. 90%. The United States now leads China in only 8 out of 74 track technologies. 8 out of 74. The Chinese Academy of Sciences ranks first in 31 critical technologies, while MIT, long revered as a global innovation anchor, ranks top 10 in just 10 fields. President Xi Jinping has been remarkably direct about China's technological ambitions. In his New Year address for 2026, he specifically highlighted breakthroughs in artificial intelligence and semiconductor chips, noting that many large AI models have been competing in a race to the top. And this is not empty rhetoric. Remember DeepSeek? That low-cost AI model stunned Silicon Valley at the beginning of 2025 by demonstrating how far efficiency could go even under hardware limitations. That single event caused NVIDIA's market capitalization to shed almost $600 billion in a single day. The implications of China's space solar power program extend far beyond just energy generation. If Beijing controls the innovation pipeline for space technologies, it could shape everything from future warfare to global supply chains. Many of these technologies are what experts call dual use, meaning civilian applications can easily be adapted for military advantage. A space-based solar power system could theoretically be used to provide continuous power to remote military installations, submarines, or even directed energy weapons platforms. But let us also consider the positive implications, because this is not all doom and gloom for humanity. If space-based solar power actually works as promised, it could genuinely revolutionize how we address climate change. Unlike ground-based solar farms that suffer from weather conditions and nighttime limitations, a space station captures continuous, unfiltered solar radiation. The energy is converted into microwaves and beamed down to terrestrial receiving stations, where it is transformed back into electricity and integrated into the grid. One Chinese scientist estimated that a 1-kilometer-wide solar array installed along the geostationary orbit could collect enough energy in 1 year to equal the total amount of oil that can be extracted from the entire Earth. That is a staggering amount of clean, renewable energy. President Xi Jinping announced at the United Nations in 2020 that China would peak its carbon emissions by 2030 and achieve net zero by 2060. Thanks to the rollout of cheap mass-produced green energy solutions, emissions are actually set to peak years ahead of schedule, with some analysts saying emissions already peaked in 2023. But as the world's largest developing nation, China's energy demands will continue to grow as the country modernizes its economy and improves living standards for its 1.4 billion citizens. Due to geography, it is simply not possible to build more Three Gorges-sized dams, cover vast areas of land in solar panels, or fill offshore shipping lanes with wind turbines to meet growing energy needs. Nuclear fission and fusion can help, but those facilities are usually built far from urban centers due to safety concerns. That is where space-based solar power comes in as a genuinely elegant solution. Now, some of you might be thinking, okay, but what about the challenges? What about the technical hurdles that still need to be overcome? Fair questions. Let me address them directly. Wireless power transmission efficiency through the atmosphere remains a concern. Precise beam control across thousands of kilometers is incredibly difficult. Autonomous robotic assembly of kilometer-scale structures in orbit has never been done at this scale before. Thermal management of high-power systems requires further validation. Long-duration component reliability in the space radiation environment exceeds the operational heritage of current satellite systems. Manufacturing cost reduction assumes production volumes that would require unprecedented scale in dedicated production facilities and supply chain development. But here is the thing. The Chinese approach is fundamentally different from the Western approach. China's state-driven centralized system allows for massive coordination and rapid development in ways that fragmented, slow-moving private sector initiatives in the US and Europe simply cannot match. When Chinese leadership decides something is a national priority, resources flow accordingly. The Beijing facility was funded directly by the local district government. The research involves collaboration between multiple universities and state aerospace corporations. The heavy-lift rockets being developed will serve multiple national goals, from moon landings to Mars missions to space power stations. This integrated approach creates synergies that accelerate development timelines. Compare this to the situation in the West, where NASA actively discourages space solar power research, where ESA cannot get member states to commit funding, and where private companies struggle to raise capital for long-term infrastructure projects with uncertain returns. The UK company Space Solar received about $4 million from the British government and a grant from a Saudi-backed investment fund, and is planning to commission its first commercial satellite generating 30 megawatts within 6 years. That is admirable, but compare it to the scale and timeline of China's national program, and the disparity becomes obvious. Japan remains the only Western allied nation still openly pursuing space-based solar power as part of its national energy strategy. The JAXA Space Agency and Japan Space Systems are implementing the Ohisima project, planning to demonstrate wireless solar power transmission from a satellite in low Earth orbit. But even Japan's efforts are measured in kilowatts, while China thinks in gigawatts. What does this all mean for the global balance of power? Well, think about it this way. For the past century, control over energy resources has been one of the primary drivers of geopolitical competition. Wars have been fought over oil. Sanctions have targeted natural gas. The transition to renewable energy was supposed to democratize power generation, but what if one country achieves a breakthrough technology that allows them to generate virtually unlimited clean energy from space? What if that country can then offer to share that energy with developing nations in exchange for political alignment? What if military installations around the world can be powered by beamed energy from Chinese satellites? These are not hypothetical questions anymore. These are scenarios that strategic planners in Washington, Brussels, and Tokyo should be actively gaming out. And yet the dominant narrative in Western policy circles seems to be that space solar power is too expensive, too complicated, and too far in the future to worry about. Meanwhile, China is building test facilities, launching rockets, and training engineers for the next generation of space-based energy infrastructure. The technological transformation extends beyond space solar power. Chinese firms achieved global leadership in electric vehicles, with BYD taking over half of the global EV sector. Huawei leads in 5G patents. DJI holds 70% of the drone market. China produces 5 million annual STEM graduates, creating what experts call an engineer tide that fortifies the innovation pipeline. The small yard, high fence strategy of U.S. export restrictions was supposed to cripple Chinese technological development. Instead, it accelerated indigenous innovation. The trade surplus crossed $1 trillion in 2025. China proved it cannot be pushed out of the technology race. So what should we take away from all of this? First, the era of Western technological supremacy is not over, but it is clearly being challenged in ways that would have seemed impossible just 2 decades ago. Second, space-based solar power represents a potential game-changer in the global energy landscape, and China is positioning itself to be the first mover with a coherent long-term strategy backed by state resources and scientific expertise. Third, the West's fragmented approach to technology development, characterized by debates over feasibility, struggles for funding, and short-term political cycles, is increasingly inadequate for competing with a determined authoritarian state that thinks in decades rather than election cycles. The story of China's space solar power program is ultimately a story about national will, strategic vision, and the ability to execute on ambitious long-term goals. Whether you view this development with alarm or admiration, you cannot deny its significance. The race to harvest the sun's energy from space has begun, and right now, China is winning. Folks, this is the kind of content that mainstream media rarely covers with this level of depth and analysis. If you found this video informative, please show your support by liking, subscribing, and sharing it with friends and family who care about the future of energy and global competition. Your engagement is what allows me to keep producing this kind of in-depth coverage on the issues that truly matter. Drop a comment below, letting me know your thoughts. Do you think the West can catch up to China in the space-solar race? Or is it already too late? I read every single comment, and I genuinely want to hear your perspective on this. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.